Hey everyone, welcome back to Speak Up. I'm your host, Ryan, and today we're talking about something really practical and important: how to introduce yourself in English. Now, introductions might seem straightforward, but there's a lot more to it when you're doing it in a second language. The way you introduce yourself can change how others see you, and it's a great chance to make a strong first impression. So whether it's for work, a social setting, or an interview, knowing how to introduce yourself confidently in English is a key skill. And if you're someone who's still learning the language, it can feel a bit intimidating. But don't worry, we'll break it down step by step for you today. Joining me, as always, is my amazing co-host, Priya, who has a ton of great insights on this topic. Priya, how's it going?
Thanks, Ryan. I'm really excited for this one because introductions are one of those things we all have to do at some point, right? And it's something that can really vary depending on the situation you're in. The way you introduce yourself at a business meeting is going to be totally different from when you're meeting someone at a party. But the core of it remains the same. It's about being clear, being confident, and being yourself. One of the challenges, especially if English isn't your first language, is finding that balance between being formal or casual, or just knowing what details to share. Sometimes people overthink it and get nervous. Or on the other hand, they rush through it and it feels a bit awkward. We're going to talk through some easy-to-follow strategies that you can use in any situation: work, social events, even online meetings. Plus, we'll give you real examples and tips on how to adjust your introduction based on who you're talking to.
Exactly. And another thing that's really important, which we'll touch on today, is not just what you say, but how you say it. The tone you use, your body language, and even small things like eye contact can make a big difference in how your introduction is received. We're going to give you a complete guide so that after today's episode, you'll feel more confident introducing yourself, whether you're in a casual conversation or something more formal. Stick with us because we've got plenty of practical examples to share that you can start using right away. All right, let's start by breaking down the basic structure of a good introduction. When you introduce yourself, there are 4 key things you want to cover. First, your name, then where you're from, what you do, and finally, something personal or interesting about you. These 4 pieces help give a well-rounded sense of who you are, without overwhelming the other person. What's great about this formula is that it's flexible and can be used in almost any situation. For example, if you're at a business event, you might focus more on what you do professionally. But if you're at a social gathering, you might lean more into your personal interests. It all depends on the setting and who you're talking to. Priya, what do you think? Do you have an example to illustrate this?
Definitely. I love how you broke it down into 4 simple parts. Here's a quick example from a casual setting. Hi, I'm Priya. I've been living in London for 5 years, but I'm originally from India. I work in event management, organizing large conferences, and in my free time, I'm really into discovering new music and attending live concerts. See how that works? I've given my name, where I'm from, what I do, and something personal that could lead to a conversation. It makes it easy for the person I'm talking to pick up on something and keep the conversation flowing. Maybe they love music or they've been to one of the events I've organized. These little details can help make a connection.
Exactly. And the key is not just what you say, but how you say it. You want to deliver this introduction in a confident but relaxed way. You're not reading off a script, but you're also not being too casual where it feels rushed. Let's imagine a more formal scenario, like an interview. You'd still follow the same structure, but adjust your tone and content. So in a job interview, you could say, "Good morning, I'm Ryan Smith. I'm from New York and I've been working in digital marketing for the past 7 years, specializing in content strategy. Outside of work, I'm really passionate about photography, which helps me stay creative." Here, you're being clear, professional, but still adding a personal touch to make yourself more memorable. The interviewer gets a sense of your experience and your interests. It's all about balance.
Right? And that personal touch at the end can really help people remember you. Even in professional settings, it shows that you're a well-rounded person with interests outside of work. Plus, It gives the other person something they can latch onto, maybe even ask you follow-up questions. It's not just about throwing information at someone, but giving them entry points for a conversation. Another tip here is to make sure you're specific. Don't just say, "I work in marketing." Instead, say what you actually do in marketing, like Ryan's example. "I specialize in content strategy." That gives the listener a clearer picture of your role. If you just say something generic, it might not stick as well.
Exactly. Being specific really makes a difference. It's also a great way to show confidence without oversharing. Remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation, not the whole conversation. You're giving enough to spark interest, but leaving room for the other person to ask questions or share their own details. For instance, if you're introducing yourself at a social event, you might say something like, "Hi, I'm Ryan. I live in New York, and I work in digital marketing. I've been really into photography lately, especially capturing cityscapes." That last part about photography might prompt someone to ask more about it, and boom, now you've got a conversation going. It's a simple structure, but it really works in all sorts of settings.
Yes. And it's really important to remember that introductions don't have to be perfect or rehearsed. It's just about feeling comfortable with those 4 key points and being able to adjust based on the situation. If you're too stiff or sound rehearsed, it can feel unnatural. But if you're too vague, it might come across like you're not confident. It's all about striking that balance, being clear and engaging at the same time.
Absolutely. I love that you brought up the idea of balance because that's really what it's all about. You want to be clear but not overly detailed, personal but not too casual, and confident but not stiff. This simple structure, your name, where you're from, what you do, and something personal, really helps you achieve that balance in any introduction. So now that we've covered the basic structure, let's talk about adapting your introduction for different situations. You've got the foundation, your name, where you're from, what you do, and something personal. But how you present that can vary, depending on where you are and who you're talking to. We mentioned earlier that there's a difference between a casual social event and a professional setting, right? For instance, at a work event or in an interview, you'd want to emphasize your professional role more, while in a casual setting, you might focus on your hobbies or interests. The same 4 key points apply, but you tweak the tone and focus depending on the situation. Let me give you an example for a professional networking event. Imagine you're meeting someone at a conference. "Hi, I'm Ryan. I work in digital marketing, specializing in content strategy. I'm based in New York and have been in the industry for about 7 years. Outside of work, I enjoy photography. It's my creative outlet. Here, I'm emphasizing my work experience and expertise because it's relevant to the professional setting. It's still personal, but the focus is more on what I bring to the table in a business context."
Exactly. In a professional environment like that, people are likely more interested in your career and skills, so you lead with that. Now, let's think about a different scenario, like meeting someone casually at a friend's party. You don't need to dive deep into your job. Instead, you can focus on common interests and keep things light. Something like, "Hey, I'm Priya. I live in London and I work in event management. I love discovering new music, especially live shows. What about you?" Here, I'm still mentioning what I do, but I'm keeping the focus more on my personal interests. It's more relaxed and invites the other person to share something about themselves. In social settings, it's important not to come across as too formal or stiff. You want the conversation to flow naturally.
That's a great point. You don't want to sound like you're at a job interview when you're just hanging out at a party. The key is adapting your tone and what you focus on. Let's say you're introducing yourself during an online meeting. With so many virtual meetings happening these days, this is something we all need to be ready for. Your intro could sound like this. "Hi everyone, I'm Ryan. I'm based in New York and have been working in digital marketing for the past 7 years, with a focus on content strategy. I'm excited to collaborate with you on this project." Notice how it's concise and professional, but I'm still giving enough context about my role and background. In an online setting, people don't have as much time or space for small talk, so it's important to get to the point while still being personable.
That's so true. Online meetings are tricky because there's usually less room for extended conversation, so you want to be clear and straight to the point. Another example of tailoring your introduction could be in a networking event or a business lunch where the goal is to make connections, but in a slightly more informal way. You could say something like, "Hi, I'm Priya. I work in event management, mostly focusing on organizing large conferences in healthcare. I've been in the field for about 6 years, and I really enjoy the challenge of bringing people together. Outside of work, I love trying new restaurants. Here, I'm still leading with my work experience because it's a networking situation, but I'm not going into too much detail. I'm also adding a personal note about trying new restaurants, which could open the door for more casual conversation."
Exactly. And that personal touch is what makes your introduction feel more natural and engaging, even in professional settings. It's not just about rattling off your job title and skills, it's about connecting with people on a human level. That's why the personal element is so important, no matter where you are. It's what makes you memorable. Another situation where you might want to adapt your introduction is during a job interview. Here, you want to be a bit more formal and focus heavily on your professional skills and how they relate to the role. You might say something like, "Good morning, I'm Ryan Smith. I'm from New York, and I've been working in digital marketing for 7 years. My main focus has been on content strategy, and I've led several successful campaigns that boosted engagement by over 50%. In my free time, I enjoy photography, which helps me think creatively in my work." Notice how I'm highlighting specific achievements and skills that are relevant to the job, while still ending with a personal touch. It shows I'm focused on the role, but I'm also bringing a bit of my personality into the mix.
Yes, and that's the beauty of tailoring your introduction. You're always balancing the professional and personal sides of who you are. In more formal settings, you lead with your experience and qualifications. But in casual or social situations, you can shift the focus more towards your hobbies or interests. It's about understanding what the situation calls for and adapting your introduction accordingly. The great thing is, once you know how to adjust your introduction for different situations, it becomes second nature. You don't have to think too hard about it. You just naturally shift the focus depending on where you are and who you're speaking with.
Exactly. You're still sticking to the same structure. Name, where you're from, what you do, something personal, but the emphasis changes depending on the context. The more you practice tailoring your introduction, the easier it becomes to make those adjustments on the fly. And the best part? It helps you feel more confident, whether you're in a meeting, at a party, or introducing yourself online. So now that we've talked about how to tailor your introduction to different situations, let's get into some common mistakes people often make when introducing themselves, and more importantly, how to avoid them. Even if you've got the structure down, there are a few things that can throw you off or make your introduction less effective. Priya, have you noticed any common mistakes when people introduce themselves, especially in English?
Oh, definitely. One big mistake I see a lot is being too vague. For example, someone might just say, "Hi, I'm Priya, and I work in event planning." While that's not wrong, it doesn't really give the other person much to engage with. If you're too brief or generic, it's harder for the person to follow up with questions or feel like they've learned something interesting about you. You want to be specific enough to give the conversation some momentum. Like I mentioned earlier, instead of just saying event planning, I would say something more detailed, like, "I organize large conferences in the healthcare sector." That gives the person something more concrete to latch onto.
Exactly. That's a good one. Another mistake I see is overloading the introduction with too much information. Some people feel like they need to tell their entire life story in one go. It's tempting, especially if you're nervous to start rambling, but that can be overwhelming for the other person. For instance, if you say, "Hi, I'm Ryan. I live in New York. I work in digital marketing. I have a dog. I love photography. I'm a coffee enthusiast, and I've been working on my cooking skills." It's just too much. You want to stick to the essentials and save the deeper details for later in the conversation. The trick is balance. You want to give enough to make a connection, but not so much that the other person feels like they're getting a full biography in the first minute. Keep it short and engaging.
Yes, and that leads me to another mistake: not being clear enough. This often happens when people are nervous or shy. They might speak too quickly, mumble, or not make enough eye contact. Even if what you're saying is perfect, if the person can't hear or understand you, your introduction won't land well. I always suggest taking a deep breath before you start speaking. Slow down, make eye contact, and speak clearly. It's a simple way to make sure your message is getting across.
That's a great point. Clarity and confidence are key. Another common mistake I've seen is using too much jargon. This often happens in professional settings where people get caught up in industry-specific terms. For example, someone in tech might say, "Hi, I'm Ryan, and I work in SaaS development, focusing on API integrations for B2B platforms." While that might make sense in a niche environment, if the person you're speaking to isn't familiar with those terms, you're going to lose them. You want to make sure your introduction is accessible to everyone. If you need to explain your role, keep it simple, like, "I help businesses improve their software by building tools that make it easier for them to connect with other services."
Exactly. You want to avoid overwhelming people with technical or industry jargon unless you're sure they understand it. One more mistake I've seen is forgetting to adapt to the situation. Like we discussed earlier, your introduction should change depending on the context, but sometimes people forget this. If you're at a casual gathering and you start introducing yourself like you're in a job interview, it can come across as stiff or out of place. On the flip side, being too casual in a professional setting can make you seem unprepared or unprofessional.
It's really about reading the room and knowing what's appropriate. So let's quickly sum up the mistakes to avoid. First, being too vague. Be specific enough to give people something to engage with. Second, overloading with information. Keep it short and let the conversation naturally unfold. Third, not being clear. Speak slowly, clearly, and make eye contact to ensure your introduction is understood. Fourth, using too much jargon. Keep your language simple and easy to follow, especially in unfamiliar environments. Finally, not adapting to the situation. Make sure your introduction matches the tone of the setting, whether it's formal or casual. Priya, do you have any quick tips for how people can practice avoiding these mistakes?
Definitely. One of the best ways to avoid these mistakes is to practice out loud. You can practice in front of a mirror or with a friend, but saying your introduction out loud helps you work out any awkwardness. You'll hear if you're being too vague or if you're rushing through it. Also, it helps you get comfortable with the pacing and the natural flow of your introduction. Another tip is to be prepared for different situations. If you know you're going to be at a professional event, have a more formal introduction ready. If you're going to a casual social event, think about how you can make your introduction lighter and more conversational. By planning ahead, you'll avoid stumbling when the moment comes.
That's solid advice. And finally, just remember to stay flexible. Don't over-rehearse to the point where it sounds robotic, but be comfortable enough with your introduction that you can adapt to the moment. The more you practice, the more natural it'll feel. So, with these common mistakes in mind, and now that you know how to avoid them, you'll be in a much better position to make a great first impression with your introduction. Let's move on to the next section, where we'll talk about nonverbal cues and how they play a big role in making your introduction even more effective. So now that we've covered the structure and how to avoid common mistakes, let's talk about nonverbal communication, the stuff that goes beyond just your words. When you introduce yourself, how you say something can sometimes be just as important as what you say. Things like body language, eye contact, and your tone of voice all play a huge role in how your introduction is received. Priya, what's the first thing you notice about someone's body language during an introduction?
Honestly, the first thing I pick up on is whether someone looks confident or not. If you're slouching, avoiding eye contact, or fidgeting, even the best introduction can fall flat. When you're introducing yourself, you want to stand tall, make sure your posture is open, and keep your shoulders relaxed. You don't want to come across as too stiff, but you also don't want to seem too closed off. Even if you're nervous, maintaining an open posture can really help project confidence.
Exactly. And along with that, eye contact is huge. You don't need to stare the person down, but maintaining natural eye contact shows that you're engaged and confident. If you're looking down or off to the side, it can come across like you're unsure of yourself or not fully present. A good rule of thumb is to make eye contact for a few seconds, and then break it naturally. It shouldn't feel forced. And let's not forget about tone of voice. The way you deliver your introduction can completely change its impact. If you're too quiet or monotone, people might not catch everything you're saying, or they might tune out. On the other hand, if you're overly loud or too excited, it can come across as nervous energy. You want your tone to sound confident but friendly, somewhere in the middle. What do you think, Priya? Any tips for finding that right balance?
Absolutely. I always suggest practicing your tone so it sounds natural. You want it to be warm, inviting, and confident. A big mistake is speaking too quickly because you're nervous, which makes it harder for people to follow what you're saying. Slow it down, and don't be afraid to pause for a second if needed. Another important tip is smiling while you speak. A genuine smile can make a huge difference. It shows that you're approachable and friendly. Even in a professional setting, a smile can go a long way in making your introduction more memorable.
Exactly. Nonverbal cues like your posture, eye contact, tone, and even a simple smile can help you come across as more approachable and confident. Let's put it all together with a quick example. Imagine you're introducing yourself at a networking event. You stand tall, make eye contact, smile, and say, "Hi, I'm Ryan. I'm from New York and I work in digital marketing. In my free time, I enjoy photography." Delivered with confidence and warmth, even a simple introduction like this can leave a lasting positive impression.
Yes, that's a perfect example. Remember, people often respond more to how you make them feel during an introduction. If you come across as confident and approachable, they'll be more likely to engage with you and continue the conversation.
Before we wrap up, let's give our listeners a few quick actionable tips to help them practice and perfect their introductions. First tip, practice out loud. Don't just think about what you'll say, actually speak it out loud. Whether it's in front of a mirror, with a friend, or even recording yourself, hearing your own voice will help you get more comfortable with your delivery.
Definitely. And my second tip is to prepare for different situations. If you know you'll be in a professional environment, have a more polished introduction ready. For social events, keep it lighter and more relaxed. The more you practice adjusting your introduction for different settings, the easier it'll be when the moment comes.
Great point. My third tip is to focus on body language. Even when you're practicing, stand up, smile, and pay attention to your posture and eye contact. You want to practice feeling confident, not just sounding confident. And one last tip, stay flexible. Don't memorize your introduction word for word. Just be comfortable with the main points and let the conversation flow naturally. You don't want it to sound too rehearsed or robotic.
Exactly. If you're relaxed and flexible, your introduction will feel more genuine and conversational. And that's really the goal, to sound natural and confident no matter where you are or who you're talking to. That's it for today's episode of Speak Up. We've covered a lot, from the basic structure of a great introduction to tailoring it for different situations, avoiding common mistakes, and even using nonverbal communication effectively. I hope you're all feeling more confident about introducing yourselves in English now.
Definitely. Remember, the more you practice, the more natural it becomes. Just stick to the key points: your name, where you're from, what you do, and something personal. And don't forget to smile and be yourself. Thanks for listening. If you found this episode helpful, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. We'll be back soon with more tips to help you speak English with confidence. Until next time, keep practicing those introductions, and we'll see you in the next episode of Speak Up.